So I just want to share with you some of the things that the Lord laid upon my heart, and some of maybe my life's experience as a dad. And, you know, one of the great things about being a dad, it's always positive. Oh, yeah. It's always... I don't think so, folks. There are times when we are just totally negative. That's all right. I don't mind. I've got it all written down here. So what responsibilities do we take on as a father? Do you know, the first thing we take on is we take on responsibilities to provide for our children. You know, and it doesn't matter where we are, we want to have provision for our kids. We provide for them out of our own earnings. So I always thought that my two boys, and I have two boys, so I'm a bit like the message I'm going to preach today, I always felt like they should know I loved them because I provided for them. They had a roof over their heads, they had food in their stomachs, and if they wanted to go out, provided I could go take them out and drop them off and pick them up and bring them home, I was fine. If they wanted to go out by themselves, it was panic stations because I never knew what they were up to. And being boys, yeah, so we provided the clothes for them as my dad provided clothes for me. I don't ever remember my father, who was an Edwardian father, saying he loved me, but I do remember that when I was in the army and I knew that my dad had an aneurysm and was not expected to live, that it could go any time. I remember walking up to him one Father's Day and he was on the bed, and I looked at him and I said, "You know, old man," I couldn't call him Dad, "you know, old man, I love you." And I think that's the first time I ever told him that I loved him. And he never ever said it back. That wasn't the point. The point was that my father saw his love in the same way that I saw mine, by providing for me out of what he earned. And that was his expression of love for us. And then we want to protect our kids. Do you know, I can remember when Peter was just a young boy, we had a high-set house, well, a low-set house, but it was high at the back, it was on a slope. And I must have told him 50 times not to sit on the veranda. There was a little veranda at the back, a little square thing about yay big enough for two people to pass on. Don't sit on the top, sit on the top rail. So what does he do? Sits on the top rail, and next thing, he's not there. And I hear this crack. And I look down, and there's a big concrete downpipe with a big cement, and he's lying right next to it. And I thought, oh, he's dead. Oh, you know, your heart sort of stops. And then he cried, and I realised he wasn't dead. I could have killed him, but he wasn't dead. And so I went down, and this hand was lying back against his wrist. He'd broken both bones in his wrist, and it was lying back against his wrist. So I was in the army at Canungra, so I called the army ambulance, which came and picked him up. And he's whinging about his leg, and I said, "Look, don't worry about his leg, it's his arm. He's just a born whinger, don't worry about it." Because I was so relieved that he wasn't dead. It turned out that he had a fracture in his leg as well, which I hadn't recognised. And so, but my desire to protect him was so great that I just wanted to protect him from that one thing which I could see. A few months later, I mean, this kid was accident prone. He jumps off a culvert straight onto a broken bottle. No, straight through the side of his foot. So I've got him in my arms, mind you, and I've got his foot up here, hanging onto it to stop it bleeding, and his head down here, and I'm walking up this hill carrying this kid, praying all the time that he's not going to bleed to death, because you know what it's like when you cut an extremity, you know, the blood's running down, his blood's running down my arm. All I want to do is protect him. So then I'm due to get married, and he's going to be my best man. And what happens? He's come off his motorbike and broken his hip. I tell you, this lad. But all I want to do was protect him. So we have a really strange relationship, a bit like this next story that we're going to be looking at the father and the son. from Luke chapter 15. Now, I haven't written all of the verses down, because if I wrote all of the verses down, we'd be here for the rest of the day. And it's Jesus saying, and he said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of these said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. Now, I'd like to tell you, that being a pastor, I'm really wealthy. So when they say, divided your wealth, one got 50 cents and one got $1. That was my wealth. But what I had, I gave. And my youngest son, who lives in Victoria, rang me just after I got out of the army, and he knew I'd come into a little bit of money. Dad, the gearbox in the car's gone. Can you help me fix it? So, how much do you need, son? Oh, $500 will do it. And this is going back to the 80s, mind you. So I gave him $500. Then the other son rang. Dad, this has gone wrong. Can I have $500? So I gave him $500. This is the way it works. But what happened was that over a period of time, those boys wouldn't speak to me, and I realised the money that I had lent them was standing between them and me. So I said to them, you can consider the money as a gift, but don't you ever ask me for another $1, because you ain't going to get it. And that's when I divided my wealth, that was it. Not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country where he squandered his estate with loose living. In other words, wine, women and song. And we all know what happens when we spend our money on that. There is nothing left at the end of it. Do you know, some years ago, my eldest son and I had a tremendous argument. We were living at Granville at the time, and he'd put his dog in the backyard with a chain. Now, if anyone that knows my wife knows she's really proud of her garden. And this dog had run with its chain right through the yard and pulled flowers out and shrubs out, and it was an absolute mess. So when I came home, I had a few words to him, because we'd been away. He had a few words to Margot, and I said to him, no one goes crook at my wife except me. And so he left, and I hadn't heard from him for about 13 or 14 years. Now, that's a long time for a dad to... And I was always wondering, what's going on? Is he still alive? Is everything okay? And suddenly I'm out playing golf with my brother John, and John said, Peter called in the other day and gave me his phone number. If you'd like to contact him. So I went home and I rang him, and there was a tremendous sense of reunion. Now, I've got to tell you this, my son is 62 years old. He still rings me these days, and before he hangs up, he'll say, Dad, I love you. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Because I can say that to him too. But what's even better is that when we meet, he shakes me by the hand. No, he doesn't. He runs up to me and gives me this huge bear hug and then says, I love you, Dad. And that's absolutely incredible when you consider where we were. Now we need to look at this story, because this story follows much the same line. Now, when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. There are times in my own life when I've gone out and I've spent $1, and I've wondered whether it was wise, and then we've had a bill, and I thought, I wish I hadn't spent that $1. I wish I'd kept it. But it was probably more than $1, but I'm using that as an example, because I don't want to appear extravagant. And so when we need something, we need to put something aside for it. But this son had spent everything that he had and had nothing left. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him in the fields to feed swine. Now, Jesus, when he's talking about this, uses a couple of examples. Firstly, he talks about 2 sons. Why? Because sons were important. I'm sorry, mums. Mums were not important. I wouldn't dare say that in today's society, but in that society it was true. When women left home, all of their belongings automatically belonged to the husband. So they had nothing. A terrible state of affairs. But in this case, he had absolutely nothing, and he was a Jew, and he was feeding pigs. There would be nothing lower for a Jew than to have to go and feed an animal that they considered unclean. But like most sons and fathers and mothers, I guess, we sometimes have second thoughts. And he said in verse 18, I will get up and go to my father and say to him, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Have you ever had a son try to disown you? Man, I tell you, I've never had it, but if my son ever tried to disown me, I'd nail both feet to the floor until he changed his mind. Because there's no way in the world I'm going to let my son walk away ever again. But the father said to his slaves, bring out the best robe and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Here we are. He's now saying, I want to re-establish him as a member of my household. And God does the same for us. Doesn't matter where we go or what we do or what we do wrong, God is prepared to reclothe us and put a ring on our finger. The ring on our finger says we're part of the family. That's what it says. Doesn't say that I'm married to Margot. This one does, but a ring on the other hand says I'm part of the family. I'm back where I belong. And bring the fatted calf, for this son of mine who was dead is alive. It's a terrible thing to think that someone might have passed away. I have a younger brother, Rodney. We send him Christmas cards every year and never get a response. I do not know whether he is alive or dead. And that's a terrible thing. I don't even know where he lives. All I do is I have an old address, and I know he gets the Christmas cards because they never come back, although with the post office these days that may not necessarily be true. But certainly when I send him a Christmas card, I don't hear a word. And I pray for him. I think about him. He's my youngest brother. But he who was dead is alive, was lost, and is found. And that's how I feel about my son Peter and how God feels about us. It's how he feels about us every time we turn our back on him. He is waiting with open arms to receive us. This story tells us that the father looked down the road to see his son return. And God does the same for us. He's always looking down the road for us to return. We are his people, whether we acknowledge it or not. Everything on the earth is God's. And it says that in Matthew 6:26-27, it tells us how much God loves us. And it uses an example. Jesus always used examples that people could relate to. Look at the birds of the air. Well, I'd rather not these days. We've got Mickeys in our backyard, and every time I go out, they're nesting, and they just swoop. And the first thing you know they're there is you hear this snap as they go over your head. So I'm not feeding the birds for the next month or so until their fledglings are out of the nest, because I don't like being attacked. But they do not sow, nor do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? Do we worry so much sometimes about what's going to happen to us and what provision God has made for us. He has made provision for us right up until the very end of time. Didn't Jesus say, in my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. If it were not so, I would have told you. See, right from the moment we are born until the moment we go back to be with him, he provides for us every step of the way. I could tell you stories about God's provision. Just one. Margot and I was going to college. We were mowing lawns for a living, and you know what it's like when it's wet. Everyone wants their lawn mowed when it's wet, and you can't do it. So Margot, I think, had in those days about 25 cents, and it was enough to buy a prescription. That's how long ago it was. It was either buy a prescription or a loaf of bread. And, what do you do? But in any case, Margot didn't go anywhere. And when I came back from college, because we had laid it before the Lord and said, Lord, we can't do anything about this. My army pension's not due for another 2 weeks. So you better provide for us. We had sent some sapphires to the gem fields, and they had sold them and had sent cash in an envelope by messenger, which arrived that day. God provides when we need it, not when we want it, but when we need it. And I know that Dave and Pat have shared that with me time and time again about God's provision in their lives, particularly when they owned a taxi cab. Are we not worth much more than the birds of the air? Of course we are. I know today what a wonderful experience it is for me to be a father, but I'm not just a father to my boys, I'm a father to a congregation. I'm also just taken on a role as a chaplain for Baycrest Old Folks Home. Here's me 83 and I'm dealing with old folks. So that sort of doesn't make much sense, except that yesterday I went in and I met this lady. Every time I've gone to see her, it's been lunchtime and she's been out in the lunch hall. So yesterday I was early, I called in, and her name is Helen, and she had a niece with her, Wendy. And I said, hi, I'm the chaplain. And so Wendy immediately grabbed all the family photos and showed me the family photos. And this is Dad, and this is so-and-so, and this is my mum. And so as we're getting ready to leave, I always pray. So I said, I'll just have a word of prayer with you if that's all right. And I prayed with them. And for the first time, not the first time in my life, but Wendy, who was probably in her 30s, said, that is the very first time I've ever felt engaged in prayer. And I just trust God, for there's another family that I can literally be the spiritual father to for as long as they're with us. Helen's memory's going, and I know that for some of us that can be a bit of a worry. But when I go to see some of these old folks and I say, where were you born? Oh, I don't remember. You know what my answer is? The memory's not important. Don't fret about it. Just enjoy the fact that we can sit here and talk. What did you do for a living? Oh, I don't remember. So we'll just talk about other things, because I want to find out not how their memory's going, because I know it's shot by now, but I want to find out how I can relate to them, how I can touch their lives in some way for Jesus Christ. And I leave them with this thought, that for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and of love and of self-control. And we need to remember that when we're very, very fearful about things, and that includes the son, that lost son. And God knows, as his children, when we worry. I thought I had one. In fact, I'm sure I had one more here, but it seems that I haven't brought it with me. So let me just... It was this, and it comes from Psalms. And it says, everything in the earth, everything on the earth belongs to God, from Psalm 24. Everything belongs to God. All that's on the earth and in it belongs to God. That's us. That's our goods. That's everything that we participate in belongs to God, and yet God gives it to us. When we read Genesis, God said, "This I give to you for your benefit." How about that? Isn't that a loving, gracious Heavenly Father? May we have the same grace and the same spirit of giving when it comes to our own children. May the Lord bless and keep you. Thank you.